So it is the 23rd week after Lent, All Saints Day. Some are celebrating Halloween for some of us. But instead of focusing on the gospel this morning, which could be fun or easy, I thought we might visit the Hebrew text this week, or all those fun names. You're welcome. Let's look at the book of Ruth. It's a pretty short chapter, four chapters, written in the 6th or 4th centuries. Tells of a Moabite woman named Ruth and Naomi, who asks Ruth to call her Mara. What word is that? Do you recall? What word did she use? What did God make her? Bitter. Bitter is what Mara means. The God of the Israelites is her God, and it's kind of a tragic story, isn't it? In her telling of it, God killed her husband. You want to say his name? Come on, let's try. Huh? Who said it?
Capital E.
Uh-huh.
Eli. We'll call him Eli.
No, we don't call him Eli. He's not Eli.
Elimelech.
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 Elimelech. Very good. Elimelech. All right. The famous line, where you go, it's misused a million times for services of marriage. And it's not that kind of love, right? But we use it. Pastors are asked all the time to use this in the services of matrimony. We're going to use it a little bit differently today, and I hope you'll follow along with me. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. This is the fundamental centering point of our scripture today. The book of Ruth centers around God and family, chosen family. And we'll talk about why this is so pivotal in this text in a little bit. The book is held in high esteem by our Abrahamic siblings, our Jewish siblings, who fall under the category of Jews by choice, right? She chose this. And we'll talk about how this is really impactful here. As is evidenced by the considerable presence of Boaz in rabbinic literature. This is a pretty heavy text in its short writing. There is sexuality and sensual things, as noted later in the text in the threshing floor scene. The book of Ruth functions liturgically. It's read during the Jewish holiday. It's ordinary for us. It's in the ordinal time. But it's a Jewish holiday at Shavuot. It's the weeks as well as the liturgical calendar for us in ordinary time. Okay, but it's really important in the Jewish text. During the time of Judges, I'm going to just give you the whole kind of thing here, how it lays out. An Israelite family from Bethlehem. Now, it's interesting because they're from Bethlehem, and Bethlehem is the home of bread of life. That's what Bethlehem means. So it's flourishing. So the Israelite family from Bethlehem, Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their sons Mahlon and Chilion immigrate to a nearby country of Moab. And we'll get to why Moab is important in a little bit. And it's important to Christians as well as to our Jewish brothers and sisters, siblings. And I say siblings because, you know, we don't want to be binary for those folks either. Elimelech dies, right? And the sons married two Moabite women. Milan married Ruth, and Chilean married Orpah, which is very interesting. If you want to know contextually, Oprah Winfrey was supposed to be Orpah, but it was misspelled. So she would be Orpah, but now she's Oprah. But that's just an interesting thing with contemporary stuff going on. After about 10 years, the two sons of Naomi, they also die, right? So Naomi is a grieved woman, right? She decided to return to Bethlehem, but guess what? Bethlehem is at that time pretty far away. And so where they're at is having a famine. And so this kind of juxtaposition of this feasted place known for bread of life and where they're experiencing this famine, linguistically, there's some stuff happening in the text. And I only know this from taking Hebrew Bible, which was, let me tell you, the hardest class I ever took was this, learning the Hebrew language. So she tells her daughters-in-law to return to their own mothers and remarry. Now this is important because of the law that's happening at the time, because they are free from her. They are no longer kind of property, because what? There are no brothers to marry, right? So they would all kind of be property if what? If Naomi had other children, but she doesn't, and she has no anticipation of what having other children because there's no husband, or because she must have been over 60, right? Because then she would have a possibility of having another husband and the possibility of having another child, maybe, or a husband that would come with what? Other sons that then would marry these other women that would be her property at that point, right? So she frees them to go back to their own mother's homes, right? So Orpah does what? I'm gonna ask for some participation. She says, right? She says, peace out, I'm going back, right? To her own family. And Ruth does what? Chooses to stay despite Naomi's what? Pleas for her to return home to her birth family. And we can say a couple things here that's happening. Ruth is just not Ruth. Naomi's grieving and she's bitter. She's Mara at this time. She's asked to be called Mara. But she doesn't, there's nothing happening. She has no opportunity at this point. She's gonna go back to Bethlehem and hope, right, that somebody's gonna take pity on her, right? She's gonna hope for something better, but she also doesn't have any need to take care of Ruth, and she's gonna hope for something better for Ruth. So in verse 20, that's where we get, and we're not there, that's not included in this pericope of text, but that's where in verse 20, Naomi says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty, and in this text, we don't call God by God's name, so Almighty has made my life very bitter. Now, no one's gonna blame Naomi for her bitterness. I'd be pretty upset too, right? I have no opportunity for employment, right? In that current context for culture. All my family's dead. I have nothing. But I'm also not sure that it does anything to blame God for that situation. And it certainly doesn't change her condition or her situation or her circumstances. But we, like Naomi, know what it's like to blame others, right? Even God for our circumstances. I have a running joke with a friend of mine, and it's a silly kind of thing. Whenever she doesn't answer my call or text, I send another, either she or I, we send this pretty mean-spirited text saying, why do you hate me? Every time. So, you know, and it's a joke, right? But it's like Naomi sends this text to God saying, why do you hate me? Nothing good is happening for her. She has no opportunity for anything good to happen in her life. And it's just that simple, right? I'm going to change my name to bitter. And at that point, if you're walking around, it's pretty unlikely that anything good is going to happen for you, right? You've let all the good people in your life, the last possible person that cares for you, you've pushed her away. What good is going to come of that, right? And the task of turning around such a person for good is pretty daunting, right? How can Ruth possibly do that? What must Ruth see in Naomi? So let's talk about the biblical law. Family issues were considered the category of property. So if family disputes come up, they would turn to biblical law to be settled. The story of Ruth completely calls into question the idea of family issues being defined in the context of property. So there's more to this problem though. Moabites were considered inferior people. Descending from who? Do you guys know? Lot and his daughter. Deuteronomy 23 says that no Ammonite or Moabite shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. None of their descendants, even in the 10th generation, shall ever be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. The story doesn't say why Naomi and her husband chose Moab, but they now become foreigners, immigrants. And that's when the trouble begins. First, the father dies, leaving Naomi and her two sons, making connections in this foreign land. Then the two sons marry Moabite women, probably to help establish themselves in the foreign land where they are. So more disaster happens when no children are born in 10 years and both sons die. Naomi is left alone in a foreign land with two Moabite daughters-in-law, and this is no longer a family unit, according to biblical law at the time. Ruth completely rejects this conclusion with a speech that redefines family. Ruth is willing to leave her own mother and father and her country because of an act of devotion and love to Naomi. Ruth believes that they're bound together as family regardless of what biblical law says. And it's not even her Bible, her God. For sake of loyalty and love, Ruth is willing to become an immigrant in an enemy nation. It's a pretty radical commitment. It's kind of like our story last week, right? Naomi tells her, go back to your family. And Ruth does what? Stays. I mean, she ends up going because they travel together, right? But she stays with Ruth. But Ruth replies, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Again, where you go, I go. Your people will be my people. And we know the rest of the story with Boaz, and she ultimately becomes betrothed and has a family of her own. And what accounts for then the redemption of Ruth, and thus for the rescue of Naomi's property, family name, and lineage. By the grace of God, this redemption flows from Ruth's unexpected decision not to abandon Naomi. Ruth commits tenaciously to Naomi with an oath of loyalty that she's not bound by legally or even religiously. Declaring her commitment to become an Israelite daughter to her and to worship Israel's God. This gets fun. Ruth thus abandons her Moabite identity. Boaz then accepts Ruth. This happens in Ruth 2 because we're not going all through this, but we kind of can today because it's such a short book. Otherwise, a foreigner, because of this loyalty. There's really some trickery that happens in Ruth. It's kind of fun. We should do a Bible study on it. Ruth embodies the Lord's loyalty to Naomi, this bitter woman. And because Ruth has then taken refuge under the wings of the Lord, Boaz takes her under his wings, redeeming her. Boaz embodies the Lord's redemption of Ruth in his own redemption of her. The book narrates how Moabite Ruth becomes a daughter of Israel, better than 7 sons, to Naomi. By her faith, Ruth becomes deeply significant. And deeply significant as a woman in Israel's history. Ultimately, she becomes on par with Leah and Rachel, who built up the 12 tribes. And like Tamar, who built up the line of Judah. Because of the Lord's faithfulness to Ruth and Boaz, the world is given a Messiah. The book of Judges then provides a setting for Ruth. The basic purpose of the book of Ruth is to show how the Lord intervenes to protect Naomi's family line from extinction, in order that her great-great-grandson, David, the future divinely chosen king of Israel and ancestor of the Messiah, might be born. If you look at Ruth 4:17 through 22. The book is ultimately the world's miracle story. So when people say God doesn't change God's mind, I don't know. It recounts how close the world came to having its hope of cosmic restoration cut off and changed forever. But how the Lord intervened to preserve Naomi's line. So maybe this book is about Naomi and how bitterness can be changed too by radical love. To ensure that God's mission to rescue the world through Jesus, a Messiah, through the Son of David, stayed on course. But Ruth is also good news for us as we figure out where God is leading our church, how we intervene with those bitter people in our lives. I don't know what our chosen family moment is today for us. I think I have a few every week, right, Beth? Don't we have those moments that we choose to share our stories with someone, or we hold back, or we have those folks that we talk to and then we turn away because their stories are too hard to hear, or they're abrasive, or sometimes we're the abrasive ones. Listening to you yesterday or reading your email, Beth, I had that moment. Or you have this moment where you're sharing something, or you've thought about a conversation that you've had earlier in the week and you're like, oh, that was a moment. Our stories intersect with people, right. Our stories intersect with people all the time. And we don't realize that we're changing the course of our own history and someone else's history all the time. And sometimes we realize it and sometimes we don't. But that's the thing. In order for us to decide that we are in this together, we have to have a lot more of those moments where we share our story with someone else's and they get it. But we don't always know that we're having those moments in real life, in real time. So I'm watching this show on Apple TV and it's probably not church appropriate. It's called See. And I initially watched it because it has Jason Momoa in it. So that's my confession. But the message is that vision people have gone extinct and blindness is the norm, right? And then vision people who could see, started coming back, but just kind of hit and miss, right? But when the vision people started coming back, all their other senses were kind of dull. And so those people who could see couldn't really see all the things, right? Their other senses would make them miss things that those that were blind could actually see. Having vision was kind of a handicap of sorts to all these other senses. It's an interesting way of seeing things, especially in light of our text time, that was it 3 or 4 weeks ago, where the man who had blindness actually ultimately had vision to follow Jesus. But for us, as a historical congregation, how do we have vision while still seeing, right? Who are we going to hitch our wagon to? And more importantly, who is willing to come alongside of us and hitch their wagon to us and move forward so that our lineage will not be broken? Wow, this idea of choosing and chosen family will become increasingly more important. I hate Pew studies. I both love the data and hate that heavy feeling of reading what's happening to the church. But those stories, like what Beth was talking about, and working in the real world when I go pick up a shift at Founding Farmers, give me tremendous, hope, right? Because people need what we have. Ruth's story and Beth's story give me hope. People want connection. The work of telling our story and moving from famine, both real famine and metaphorical famine, to feast, and doing this radical work of loving the bitter, the wounded, the hurting, the marginalized, both in here and out there, is central to the work of our survival, this survival, and all our survival. Ruth wasn't doing it out of any other ulterior motive than the fact that she loved Naomi. And Beth, I guarantee you, when you had your conversation, you weren't doing it for any other reason than that was what was important in that moment, that conversation. But those are the types of conversations we need to have and to feel more comfortable having for this church. And that's how we need to switch to what evangelism is, because that's what it is. That's all it is. It's not, hey, want to come to my church? It's, hey, this happened to me. Here's my story. I care about you. And this is what we're doing. I'm not going to leave you. Let's talk more about that. And those are the conversations that are important to have. Amen.